Welcome back. We are now ready for the second presentation of today. The company is ViroGates, and it will be presented by its CEO, Jakob Knudsen. Jakob, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Alf and Pascal. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a speech here today. I will be presenting ViroGates to you, a company which is listed on First North in Copenhagen. Let me see if there we go. ViroGates is a commercial stage company, so that means we have approved product, CE-IVD approved product in the medtech space that we're marketing for the hospital sector, primarily at this point in Europe, but later also to the rest of the world. We work to improve patient care, we work to reduce healthcare costs, while at the same time empowering clinical staff. And I'm going to get a little bit back to these value propositions that we offer to our customers. As mentioned, we are listed on the First North Growth Market in Copenhagen, and we were listed over the summer of 2018. We work with a biomarker called suPAR. suPAR is a very broad inflammatory-based biomarker, which has the capability of saying which patients need to be admitted and which ones can be safely sent home for ambulatory treatment. The beauty or this power of ViroGates is that we have vast clinical experience with our products. We have more than 700 peer-reviewed journals at this point in time, and have measured about 350,000 blood samples during our life as a company. We have several patents. We have 3 patent families granted, and one that we recently filed close to a year ago, which covers our products. We have basically 3 product lines, all working with the biomarker suPAR. The one that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the AutoFlex ELISA, is primarily a product aimed at the research market. This was the initial application of our product. The second one is the Quick Triage. That was the second one. The ELISA was the first, and the Quick Triage the second. And most recently, we've had the TurbiLatex product that I'm gonna get a little bit back to. The next slide may seem a little bit busy, but I'm gonna try to explain you the highlights. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side, you can see basically what our product does. If patients come in with a low suPAR, reflected in the green lines, the risk of mortality within 30 and 90 days on the x-axis is very, very low and comparable to the background population. Whereas if the patients have higher suPARs, mainly reflected in the red lines, they have a much higher risk of mortality, up to about 50%. And those are obviously the most severely affected patients, with typically with sepsis, very serious COVID-19 disease, and so on, organ damage. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see some of the areas that we've looked at recently in our clinical research. So all these different types of medical diseases give rise to an elevated inflammation level in the body. The inflammatory status is basically the underlying way that the body tries to get rid of this disease. And it's, as we can see also from the COVID-19 cases, it's very important that this is in some sort of balance. It needs to be right at this exact level where it doesn't go overboard, but it's also active, so it acts to remove the diseases. And this is what we can measure by ways of our suPAR product. As mentioned, we are a commercial operation at this point in time. We have a direct sales force in the Nordics, in Spain, and in France, and we've started getting our first customers there. We also have what we label the indirect sales channel that's managed by us, but we sell via distributors and also via an agent in Greece. So typically the distributors channel. We have by now 8 hospitals with Super in clinical routine in 5 different countries, and this is really our case to roll this out in Europe for this to be made applicable to many more patients. We have more than 50 hospitals evaluating the clinical implementation of suPARnostic, and that's predominantly in the markets that we're active. We have a large pool in Spain and also quite a few in France and the Nordics. As I mentioned, we have 3 different value propositions. We work to improve patient care. By that, we mean that the patients that should be admitted should also get the bed. The ones that are most seriously affected are obviously dependent upon being admitted to care. But you can probably, especially in these times, appreciate that the patients that are not necessarily in need of getting a hospital bed may actually recover better in a home quarantine or with ambulatory care, because you don't have the risk of getting additional infections from being hospitalized. The utility of our product is also such that it can reduce the healthcare costs. We can send many more patients home earlier, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. And we also empower the clinical staff. The clinical staff can make much more confident decisions, especially the junior staff, which are then guided by objective science rather than fiddling around with prior knowledge. So what we've seen in some of our studies, most recently also in large controlled randomized studies in Denmark, is that we can reclassify many more patients to be sent home early on, and thereby reduce the time spent at the hospital by an overall 6%. And that basically adds to the saved hospital care costs that I mentioned, and that was picked up in the studies. But obviously, we also do sort of more qualitative questionnaires with doctors, and I've shown you a few. And the client, customers that we work with really appreciate the product when we've had it implemented. So just a few words on COVID-19. COVID-19, in our view, is an inflammatory disease, much like anything else. So we early on made a hypothesis that low suPAR would enable patients to be discharged for home quarantine, and elevated suPARs would mean that they would need to be admitted to care because of the high risk of mechanical ventilation. And we've also seen some preliminary data shown on the right-hand side in the top corner by a Greek study where we actually saw a 16-fold increase of ending up in a ventilator if the patients had a high suPAR compared to the ones with low suPAR, where we didn't see any patients needing a ventilation. So that we are obviously also building evidence on with a much larger cohort as we speak, with addition from US data and from various sites across Europe. So that's going to be very interesting to see. We're also doing a study with the Greek group in terms of strategizing patients with COVID-19 disease to receive different types of drugs. And we're obviously also anxiously looking into those data. As I mentioned, the TurbiLatex, the most recent product that we launched, is the one that we pin our growth hopes on. This is, if you compare it to a printer, it's basically the overall turbidimetric instrument is the printer itself, and we add the cartridges that for the analyzed to be analyzed, and this is basically, so suPAR is just another printer cartridge into the overall system. It works by large machines situated at the clinical lab of the hospital. So basically, it allows for completely seamless getting the suPAR results. It'll be reported just like any other analyte that the hospital measures. And we've so far validated our products on both lines from Roche, Siemens, and Abbott, some of the largest players in this field. The next slide may seem a little bit busy and chaotic, but I'm going to try to walk you through because it's actually one of the most important take-homes of this presentation. the customers of the hospital basically arise by either personal walk-in in some situations by ambulance or by a referral from a general practitioner. When they arrive at the hospital, they're basically triaged as it is, risk stratified into different categories. So when we look at the risk triaging without suPAR, based typically on physiological scores, you can see the result in the middle of the screen where it says no suPAR and the share of patients, how they're categorized into different groups. And you see this large pool of yellow patients, and those are actually the ones that we want to avoid, because those are the ones that we don't really know what to do with, or the physicians don't really know what to do with. And they're typically put in bed for observation for an extended period of time, where you try to seek out what is the matter with them. But if you add suPAR on top of that, in the next column, you see that you actually re-stratify the patient so that many more fall into the low-risk patient group. And that's the beauty of it, the power of sending patients home. We can send many more patients home than without the suPAR test. And you see also that some high-risk patients are actually captured. And the physicians obviously also want that. They don't like to discharge a patient, which then shows up in an even worse state later on. So we deliver on our value propositions. On the next slide, we show a little bit about the market opportunities. When we're looking at the observational patients in medical care, they are about 2 to 3% of the overall uptake population of a hospital, and that amounts to 240 million euros in Europe, the market potential, 210 in North America, and rest of the world about 600 million. So all in all, about 1 billion euros in market potential. On the right-hand side, you see some calculations which we made based on the findings of this randomized control study that I mentioned, where we look into the savings potential in various healthcare markets. And obviously, the savings potential depend very much on the cost of a hospital bed per hour. And in a large market like Germany, you see a huge savings potential. It's basically an expensive market in terms of healthcare. But even in a lower cost market like Poland, you actually have a net yield to the hospital of using the net saving of utilizing the suPARnostic tests when they paid for the tests, importantly. We're also looking into a market where we can potentially move this out a stage into the general practitioner's office, because needless to say, they're also interested in knowing whether to admit the patients into hospital or send them home with much more confidence. And obviously, we're looking into a much larger market in terms of the number of tests conducted. We have estimated this at around 19 billion euros as a market opportunity based on the number of health GPs in Europe, and also the number of tests reasonably conducted in the CRP and other markers area. Even further on, we also look into the private health test market, because needless to say, with the growing interest in accumulating knowledge about your personal health, the private health test market is extremely interesting, and we see the pharmacies picking up on this opportunity, wanting to offer services to the individuals coming in to know more about their inflammatory status. We're doing some development with an Austrian company right now in terms of launching a product which would be capable of addressing these markets. And we're looking so far to launch this next year, in 2021. In terms of our capital raise and spendings, we launched the company on First North with the ambition of deploying the capital raised, the gross proceeds of 75 million Danish, to go to commercial execution, and that would basically build up with the sales organization. We do operate focused, so we're not deploying a huge sales force, but we've selected targeted markets where we saw the biggest market opportunity and started there. So that's what we've deployed the funds raised for. In terms of the the management team, we have experienced people. I've been with the company 9 years myself. As a CEO, I have a vast tenure in life science. Mark, the CFO, joined us shortly about 1.5 years ago from a consultancy company. The founding father of the company, Dr. Jesper Knudsen, is with us on a part-time basis as our CSO. And we also have Thomas Karp, who has vast experience in commercializing medical products in the markets. And we have an experienced board, as you can see. I'm going to leave it to you to look at them, but they also have very long experience with commercializing in vitro diagnostic products. The most recent share price, if you look at that, we saw a surge recently. That was the announcement of our first customer in Finland. We are actually quite ambitious about the Finnish market. They have a good structure where they have quite large independent clinical labs that serve the hospitals. So we're looking very much forward to working in the Finnish market as we are in the other Nordic markets, and predominantly where we have had our biggest growth to date are Spain and most recently also in Greece. So we're picking up in terms of our commercial momentum. And those were the words almost on time, I think, Alf.
That is great, Jakob. Thanks very much. I wanted to get back to what you said about COVID-19. You said you had collected some data that Supa could be helpful in triaging patients who need intensive care and don't need intensive care. You have collected some data and you're collecting more. Do you feel that there's a lot of hospitals trying to get into these tests? They must be desperate to try anything that can economize on their resources at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to appreciate that we're targeting a market where basically statistical data is king. So any hospital in a crisis situation, I would agree, have the desire to try and remedy this issue, but they are also quite conscious about a lot of products and strategies that have been tested. I mean, we saw the hydroxychloroquine. We most recently saw remdesivir, also some disappointing data and so on. So it's a little bit of applying the acceleration and the brake at the same time. So while we have some very encouraging data, we also appreciate that we need to add on the 57 patient trial that we initially reported on, and we also need that for regulatory purposes. So I hope we will get it out soon, but it's basically in the hand of very skilled clinical researchers. So we do feel that we have something to offer, but we also want to offer it at the conditions that the market basically appreciates for us to offer it on, based on solid clinical evidence.
In Spain, you have had a very big success because you have got into some hospitals, and then they have inspired other hospitals to also try Supa. Now you're into Finland. Do you have the same expectation for that market?
I do have the same expectation for Finland. We actually ran. Normally, we like to say that we have run very big studies, and we continue to do so with statistical power to report on statistically relevant findings ourselves. And then we like potentially for new customers to try out our product in a pilot phase where they use some 100 or 200 samples to get acquainted with actually working with the results. So that's kind of the general model. But in Finland, we actually ran a 1,700 patient trial that was reported recently on a conference in Finland. So and the results were very encouraging, and that led to the to starting up the Mikkeli hospital in Finland. But as I mentioned, especially the lab structure by ways of having larger labs serving different several hospitals in combination is actually favorable to us, because it allows for more of a separation between the two units, the acute care and the lab functions. So the labs are even more encouraged there to run samples like super. So yes, we do have high expectations for the Finnish market.
Lovely. That's all we have time for. Thanks very much, Jakob.
Okay, thank you, Adam and Pascal.
And we will move on in the program in just a few seconds. We will have Cordate next. Cordate, han kommer att prata på svenska. Det är VD:n Anders Weiland. Välkommen tillbaka klockan 9:50.